We have been a free civilization for about 850,000 human years. But earlier, about 1 million Earth years ago, a very strong reptilian invading force invaded the Vega area, the planets Avalon and Lyra, where what we call our ancestors of some 400,000 races of human-like beings lived in peace, and therefore did not know how to defend themselves. They ended up fleeing from the invading reptile force to save themselves, and small groups of humanoid beings, or human-like, went to hide in every possible corner of this sector of the galaxy. This moment is known as the Great Expansion of Lyra, or simply the Great Expansion. Countless worlds were seeded with humans, the species, among them Taygeta, Earth. Reptiles continued to hunt the species to the brink of extinction. From the need to survive, the Federation, how it is now known, was born. The Federation is made up of thousands of species, but it was started by humanoid species as a means to defend themselves from the reptilian invasion in this quadrant of space against total extinction, as some planets with Lyrian humanoids were or had been so devastated by the Reptilians that only a handful of individuals remained. There was a Lyrian colony living in peace on Earth, in a high-frequency advanced holographic society, although on Earth there were already other species of hominids before the Lyrians arrived. The first humans from Lyra landed on the planet around 40,000 years ago, living in peace and harmony with older species like the Neanderthals. These are old, pre-Atlantis civilization times with spaceports. During that time, when that advanced holographic civilization was on Earth, a Taygetean Pleiadian colony was established that coexisted in peace and cooperation with the Lyrians. That Taygetean base was on a now defunct continent called Oceania. That base, or colony, was called Lemuria. This is before Atlantis. It was only a colony within a larger planet-scale positive civilization, and it coexisted with the Lyrian civilization present on Earth. Lemuria was a complex civilization, not only of Taygetans, but it did have a very large Taygetan component as their colony. Something like New York is a group of cultures, like Little Italy, Little China, Irish, Russians. This civilization got invaded by the reptiles. This happened after a great battle known as the First Ancient War by the researchers of ancient aliens, where nuclear weapons were used against them. That's why there are traces of bomb-grade ionizing radioactivity in places like Pakistan. The only part of that planetary civilization that remained fighting was Lemuria, as the reptiles enslaved the rest of the humanoids. Lemuria fought the invaders. Those who remained were called Adams by the Reptilians, or Adamic race. That referred to the captured Lyrians and the ones who descended from them, as this took or was going on for several generations, 40,000 years ago to 13,000, 1,200,500 years ago. Children were separated from adults. Some were used for parenting, where newborn babies were separated from their mothers at birth. These newborns were indoctrinated with reptile teachings, but they were also genetically altered. It was attempted but failed because of the very strong connection to Source that all Lyrian races have. The adults were slaughtered and eaten. The children were left to start a new race of slaves, the Adamic race. In the Old Testament, it should be read that a person there means a race or a people and not an individual. But now I must say that the invading reptilians created, using genetics out of themselves, another race of reptilians that is now indigenous of Earth. That race is still enslaved by them. They used part of their genes to enhance and use another indigenous reptilian race, probably an animal. They did that right before the confrontation of Tiamat, and right before the flood that destroyed it all, their technology and civilization, to be explained shortly. That created reptilian race survived the flood, and they are the ones that do all the reptilian low, dirty work for the supreme reptilians. The first two attempts to do the same with the anthropomorphic Lyrians didn't work, because they all had a very strong connection with Source and the spiritual. The Lyrian genetics is too strong, so if they suppress a gene, it will emerge again because of the high consciousness of the people. So they decided not to try to genetically suppress humans, Adamic race or Homo Atlantis, and opted to suppress reptilian DNA. So in the end, what the Sumerian tablets say is false, because humans were not created on Earth, nor were they successfully limited genetically. The limited ones are the reptilian slave race. the Lyrian Homo Atlantis, are only limited by belief in a genetic manner. Humans are limited only because they believe to be, even with aging. This is very important as a topic, because I go against what is said in the Sumerian tablets and other places like the Popol Vuh, insisting that it's not humans who are limited, but the lower social level reptilians. Now, we have a problem with naming the reptile species involved here. Some say it's the Usungal, others the Kingu, using names you know from Earth. We here do know who they were. We are just not sure if the translation for them should be Kingu or Usungal. For us, basically, it's the Naga and variants. The reptiles at that point created their stronghold, called Atlantis, that was over the continent now known as Appalachia, which is now under the North Atlantic Ocean. This is from where the name of the Appalachian Mountains in East United States take their name. Having said that, Atlantis is not a single place because it was an almost entirely planetary civilization. Atlantis is the reptilian civilization coexisting with Lemuria that didn't give up. Earth has been visited countless times by countless races who have left their influence there. Atlantis is widely said to be a bastion of wisdom and to be very advanced. Very advanced indeed. But it was an almost exclusively reptilian place. People on Earth are mixing qualities of Atlantis with qualities of Lyra Gaia. But they are two civilizations, where the first, Lyria Gaia, is the one that was completely like an embassy where countless races coexisted freely. Among those races were the Atlanteans, who come, as their name suggests, from the solar system of Atlas in the Pleiades M45. These are some of those that are called giants. However, there were other races who were also tall. The ones depicted in the Sumerian tablets were apparently reptilians transformed into something of a humanoid appearance for their easier interaction with the Adamic race, descendants of the Lyrian base. And mainly, these are the ones represented as large bearded men in the Sumerian records. However, the Atlanteans of the Pleiades also have beards and similar size, which makes it difficult to follow and explain this historical moment with precision. The Atlanteans are 8 to 10 meters tall. Their skin is copper-colored, brown or black beard, blue, green or brown eyes. Apparently, the Atlanteans influenced several places in Mesoamerica mainly. The last visit of them that we have registered was 600 years ago in the region that today is central Mexico, Tula Hidalgo, Atlantis. They have not returned. They are members of the Council of Alcyone and effectively by decree of said council, it is Taygeta who represents here the 9 systems of Pleiades M45. Among the races present here, when Lyria Gaia was invaded, were Selleano-Pleiadians and Andromedan bases or colonies in the area that is today India and Pakistan. These races seeded many concepts that would later serve as a basis for Buddha and that led him towards everything he did. Many beings like Shiva were extraterrestrials, and this also directly explains why various beings appear as blue-skinned in India and in that region of the planet in general. They were simply extraterrestrials of Andromedan genetic branches. Also, their writings like Nepali is preserved with up to 90% similarity with the symbology and writing of the modern Andromedan language. Shiva fought against the invading reptiles, and it is said that he won all the battles. However, the outcome disappears from the records. Obviously, the most probable thing is that he has also succumbed to reptilian weapons, with Lemuria remaining as the only place with effective resistance against the reptilian invasion. To clarify, Lemuria predates Atlantis. It coexisted with both the Lyrians and the reptiles of Atlantis. The Adamic slave race of the reptiles, the civilization of Atlantis, Old Testament. What happened at this point is that the Taygetean Pleiadians at the Lemurian resistance base knew that all this was happening with the Lyrian race, and they knew they had to intervene. They counterattacked and managed to free the enslaved Adams. And now begins Genesis. From the Old Testament, Genesis, it means the genes of the goddess Isis. Adam and Eve in the Bible is this event. As the Old Testament says, the snake, the Taygetan women of Lemuria, went onto the Garden of Eden, Atlantis' stronghold, and gave the prohibited fruit of wisdom to Adam and Eve. The Adamic race, not one man, an enslaved race. They gave it to Eve because as women they had access to the places where they were being held captive, where they were spending time, where the Taygetan women were passing as them. So they interacted with the females first. Then the Eves communicated the messages of the Taygetans to the Adams. The ancient reptiles used the serpent as a symbol for women because of its similarity to the DNA spiral, because it is the woman that gives descendants with her genes. The Egyptian hieroglyph for woman is a snake, and it is repeated in other parts of the world, China, Japan, Mesoamerica, and others. They were naked, without knowledge, and the serpent, Taygetans, gave the forbidden fruit, truth and knowledge, to Evas, who in turn gave it to the Adams. The Adams, the race, didn't have any freedom, and they had no means to reach higher knowledge. This to enslave them. To be naked, not to have knowledge. No clothes, knowledge. The reptiles got very angry because the Lemurians had freed the enslaved ones, and they started a war of extermination against what remained of Lemuria 1200,500 years ago. And this is the second great planetary scale war that also led into the Tiamat incident. But this is relevant in another way. This is why women are always repressed on Earth. This is where it started. The reptilians in power don't want women to have any rights, nothing, no power, always diminishing women as a punishment for this. That is why the reptiles, until these days, are against the woman. They attack her and they despise her, taking away the cult of the goddess, for example in Egypt, at a later time. The snake is us, Taygetean Pleiadians. The Eves are the females of the Adamic race who were the first ones to listen to the Taygetans, and then gave the males the information that led to their freedom. Adam, male Lyrian slaves. Eve's, Lyrian female slaves. Snake, Taygetan women, symbolizing genetic kinship with the Lyrians. Garden of Eden, Atlantis. Now, where was the Garden of Eden, according to scholars? Between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers in Iraq. The Atlantis headquarters, not the bulk of the civilization that was planetary with the exception of Lemuria, was right there in Iraq, and some scholars have found it. There in Iraq was the Garden of Eden, or the main stronghold of Atlantis, although the bulk of the civilization was on Appalachia. Reptiles don't forgive this fact, which took away control over their slaves, who logically armed a great revolt and ran away from Atlantis. They were not expelled, they left, because they already knew themselves naked, without knowledge, and wanted freedom. The furious reptiles then set up another great hunt, with a subsequent massacre of Lyrians and Taygetans, with some surviving. Lemuria was still standing and fighting. And it is what we do now again, making the Adamic race, or Homo Atlantis, the Earth humans, see that they have no knowledge, that they are naked, and that they must wake up. Tiamat. Tiamat, the planet that was destroyed 1200,500 years ago, was a very large planet, about 80% the size of Neptune, and was closer to Earth than Mars is today. It was a water planet with few islands and very luminescent, because with its large size, it reflected the sun a lot. And this is the source of all the myths associated with two suns in this star system. Tiamat, being a water planet, functioned as a mirror, which is why they called it the second sun. Ancient records on Earth talk about a second sun. It's not only in the Sumerian tablets, but in scripts from China, Japan, and even in Mesoamerica, in the Popol Vuh Maya. This also has fueled the Nibiru ideas all over today. This second sun is no other than Tiamat, not a sun, a planet, but as it was a huge water planet closer to Earth than Venus is now, mostly sea, it reflected the sun's light, appearing as a second sun. Continuing with the story, the Reptilians, learning that the Federation was looking for them for violating countless space rules and laws, set up a fictitious base on planet Tiamat to transmit decoy signals to mount an ambush against the Federation. The Federation was on their way already too, to see why contact with the Lemurian base and the Lyrian colony had been lost. A large combat fleet, led by Taygeta, entered and went to Tiamat to investigate the signals, and they fell terribly into the Reptilian ambush. There was tremendous space combat of epic proportions, even by today's standards, and it resulted in the destruction of more than 75% of the forces of both the Federation and the Reptilians. Weapons of mass destruction, zero-point and thermonuclear energy weapons were used, which destabilized the planet Tiamat, creating shock waves in its great ocean that resulted in the deviation of its magnetosphere, resulting in the destruction of the planet. The surface of Mars was also devastated by nuclear and energy weapons. The destruction of Tiamat brought subsequent chaos to all the delicate dynamics between the planets of this solar system. It brought with it a series of cataclysms on all the planets, creating with this a new orbital distribution of all the stars, and as we have said before, the Earth was closer to Tiamat than it is to Mars today. And that is why some of the water from Tiamat fell on Earth, which, as we have said, was a very large planet, almost the size of Neptune, and covered with water, flooding the surface of the Earth that at that time was almost entirely covered by dense forests and had 5 more continents. The flood brought with it the destruction of the reptile civilization of Atlantis and of Lemuria. The upheaval brought the deluge, Noah's Ark legend, that was nothing other than Tiamat's water, some of it, pouring down to Earth from space. It's what destroyed Atlantis and Lemuria. Also caused a pole shift, inundated the planet and created the continents as they are now. This also devastated the surface of Mars, so the inhabitants of that planet to this day stay mostly underground. For us, nothing justifies the destruction of an entire planet, and a lot of species karma is carried for that, they say. That confrontation and the war for Earth today is the continuation of the Orion Wars. They are not over yet. They are ongoing today. The difference is that now the Federation has superiority over the regressive reptiles. So, when the floods happened by the Tiamat Wars, as Lemuria was destroyed by the floods, so was Atlantis. Yes, both perished at the same time. Okay, so who remained on Earth? A vastly destroyed reptilian culture with no technology left and a small amount of Lyrian people. They enslaved them before the flood, then after using mind control, as the Reptilians were very few in numbers as compared to the Lyrians that are now the forefathers of the Earth humans of today, Adamic race. They didn't have any remaining technology, so all they had was the mind control approach. 3D matrix suppression system was placed by the Federation right after the flood. At that time, the Federation was very weak and facing a lot of problems, also because of the cataclysms. I should mention that during the destruction of Tiamat and the subsequent rearrangement of the Astros, planets of this solar system, the Earth also experienced a pole shift due to the alteration of magnetic fields. As a result, the Federation chose to install an electromagnetic barrier around the Earth as a wall. It is projected from one of the ships damaged during the conflict, the Moon, old and damaged biosphere ship of the Federation and of Andromedan construction. It was to prevent the negative reptilians from escaping, while the Federation could return to finish what they started. And thus, the 3D matrix was born. Asks Robert, what happened with the survivors of the flood? Flood survivors, what remained of Lemuria, Lyrians and Taygetans there when the earth was flooded, emigrated mainly to the coast of Japan, what is now South America, and the west coast of the USA. In the Atlantic, what remained of Atlantis, the surviving reptilians and slaves moved to the highlands of Scotland and Ireland. Asks Robert. And who are those beings that have elongated skulls, Homo capensis? Are they still on Earth? They are one more species, very linked to Atlantis. After the flood, they migrated to the highlands of Scotland and Ireland, hence the name of Highlands. From there, they went down to places more akin to them, like Egypt. They also had large settlements in South America. They come from the constellation Cassiopeia, and they inhabit many worlds there. There aren't any on Earth at this time. They lost all their technology, their ships and everything. In parentheses, there are no records of glaciation at this time. Very contrary to what established science says, there was no ice age. It was introduced as an excuse to erase the true history. Asks Robert. So those of us who are on Earth, we are not the variant that the reptiles created. I must make this very clear. As I said above, humans were not made by the reptilians. Their plan and their genetic engineering did not work because the base Lyrians themselves prevented it. due to their advanced consciousness and connection to the source. What the Sumerian tablets say, and also the Popol Vuh, is information that was provided and or written by the Reptilians, and is their point of view, with an agenda to control the humans, Lyrians. It's like a Bible again, a story rigged for an agenda. As I have said before, just because it is written in Sumerian tablets, it does not mean that it is the truth. It is written by the victors with an agenda. If these were their records, it would not be written in clay, but in quartz crystals, gold discs, or similar devices. The human beings are Lyrian, and their DNA is complete. It is only deactivated, but not by a test tube, but by the manipulation of human consciousness, because it is consciousness that activates, deactivates, and rewrites a gene, chain of genes, or the whole sequence of the genetics of a species. And it is also consciousness that creates a new species in this way, and not by random mutations or natural selection. That is why the spiritual awakening of humanity will return your DNA of 12 strands and 24 chromosomes, because it is already there, only suppressed with the use of mind control. The only thing that limits humans is the idea or belief that they are limited. Scientific ships like our ones have studied modern human DNA, and just like the results of the experiments of other races, it is confirmed that the DNA is complete.